3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely,
without a heritage, every generation starts over.
Ask not
to remind the current regime
what your country.
We, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
to get back in their box and stay there.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the Heritage Foundation, this is Heritage Explains.
Given the newsworthiness of today's topic, we are coming to you a day early on Heritage Explains. Today, Tuesday, October the 1st, Iran has launched a major missile attack on Israel, apparently in response to Israel's killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and other leaders a few days ago. Here to explain what this event may mean as it unfolds is Heritage Research Fellow for Nuclear Deterrence and Missile Defense, Bob Peters. Bob Peters, welcome back to Heritage Explains.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, as of this recording, it is Tuesday afternoon on October the 1st. We have just received news that Iran has launched a missile strike on Israel. And we've gotten news like this in the past. What does this mean? Why does it seem to be of so much consequence now?
Well, it's not just a missile strike. It seems to be a sustained missile salvo that's coming at Israel. It's ballistic missiles. It's almost assuredly incorporating some cruise missiles as well, probably coming from multiple different vectors. And so why you would do that is they're trying to overwhelm the Israeli missile defense system. What we saw back in April was a mixed salvo of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles and drones on the order of about 300 inbounds. And Israel, the United States, Jordan, some other partners did a terrific job of intercepting them. And this is round two at this point from Iran. And it's massive. It's going on right now as we're recording. And it looks like Israeli missile defenses, the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 system, are doing great work shooting down these Iranian ballistic missiles, but we have to expect that some are going to get through. Iran almost certainly learned things from the failed attack in April, and so we need to be prepared for a number of those inbound missiles to be landing on Israel and potentially causing civilian casualties in Israel itself, which are almost assuredly the targets. If that's the case, then I think we need to be prepared for a much larger and expanded war in the Middle East, because I think from Israel, the way they've been behaving over the last few weeks, and this is not a criticism of them, but all their action seems to be that the gloves are off for them. And so we need to be prepared for an expanded conflict in the coming days and weeks.
So Israel is a little bit unique in the missile defense system that it has. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so they've got a missile defense system that is tailored to fit for their own security environment. So Israel's a small country, relatively compact. And so they've got a multi-layered system that includes at the lowest level Iron Dome that's designed to take out relatively low-level rockets that are coming down at the terminal phase, so right before the impact. And so that's a lot of the stuff that's been successfully intercepting rockets coming from Hamas and Hezbollah and so forth. It's just done magnificent stuff. They've got Arrow 2 and Arrow 3, which is a ballistic missile defense, and that's for larger stuff, longer range, higher altitude, higher interception. That's been doing great work. And they've got a few other things here and there, David Sling, things like that are meant to take out different threats. And so what Israel's done is built different defensive capabilities that are designed to intercept and destroy different types of rocket and missile threats, whether it's a cruise missile or a drone or a ballistic missile or an aircraft. And they've really kind of cracked the code on this. And a lot of people for a lot of years said missile defenses are destabilizing. This was the critique that was thrown at Ronald Reagan back in the 1980s, that technology is not going to work. You're going to spend a king's ransom, and moreover, it's destabilizing to have missile defenses, and ultimately that's bad for American security. What Israel has shown is that missile defenses can work, and they can be highly effective at protecting civilian populations. Now, you can't pull that as a one-to-one analog to the United States, because the United States is a huge country with massive amounts of coastline and population centers that are spread out. It's not Israel. But nevertheless, missile defenses are scalable. And if you kind of take a page out of the Israeli playbook and say, You need different systems that can engage different types of threats, whether they're ballistic missiles or cruise missiles or what have you, at different envelopes of engagement. You can actually take away the ability of a bad actor to hold your civilian population centers at risk, to protect cities and lives, which is the goal.
Right now, obviously, Israel is in a war with Hamas, as well as with Hezbollah, as well as other militant Islamic groups around the region. And then a few weeks back, they launched a very successful attack against Hezbollah, the pager attack, which involved essentially blowing up communications equipment, pagers and walkie-talkies and things like that, that Hezbollah was using for their communications network. What do we think is the larger calculus going on here? Is this a response to that attack from Hezbollah? What's the conversation that's been having there? And as a part of that, it's important also to note that the leadership of Hezbollah has been greatly affected, including the chief of Hezbollah was killed in an Israeli missile strike. Was it last week? Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about kind of what's going on in the timeline of the conflict?
Sure. So over the last 2 to 3 weeks, as you pointed out, not only has Israel decimated Hamas, which it's been doing for the last several months since the October 7th attacks, but in particular, over the last 2-3 weeks, it has been going after Hezbollah. And why Hezbollah is important is for two reasons. One is for the last few weeks to months, they've been launching rocket attacks in northern Israel. And so parts of northern Israel, people have been pulling out of, and moving south out of range of these rockets, right? And so this is the first time, I believe, in Israel's history in which they've kind of de facto shrunk their borders, right? And that's never a good thing for a nation to do, is to cede part of their territory to an adversary who can hold that area at risk through rockets and missile attacks. But more broadly, Hezbollah for the last 3-4 decades has been Iran's quote-unquote deterrent against Israel, in that they were never strong enough to take on Israel in a conventional fight, but they had this terrorist group, Hezbollah, that could carry out, attacks and bombings and so forth within Israel itself. And that was always kind of their ace in the hole, is we can hold the civilian population of Israel at risk through this group that's in southern Lebanon. And Israel has been putting up with these rocket attacks in the northern part of the country, while in the south they've been trying to deal with Hamas in Gaza. And I think that Israel looked around, and the administration has said it a few times, show restraint, take the win. You don't need to lash back. You don't need to retaliate. And it's very clear that Israel has made the decision that they're not going to do that anymore, and that they're going to essentially take out Hezbollah. And that's when you saw the pager communication device attack that you mentioned. They killed Nasrallah, who he was the longest serving terrorist leader on the planet. He led Hezbollah for 32 years. And there's some indications that an Iranian general was killed in that same strike. And there's some indication that potentially Bashar al-Assad's younger brother, the dictator of Syria, he was killed in that attack as well. And so I think what's happened is Iran has seen Hezbollah, their deterrence, effectively be neutralized over the last 3 weeks. And so if it doesn't have a deterrent, what does it have? Well, it's got a lot of ballistic missiles. And so I think they're shooting at Israel out of a sense of frustration at the loss of Hezbollah, out of these kind of incredible strikes, including some that took place inside of Tehran itself, in which Israel was targeting Hamas leaders that were in Iran. It was targeting some Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is kind of like their best of the best, some of their senior leadership, in places that ran from Lebanon to Syria to Iran itself. And so I think that Iran has been humbled and in many ways humiliated, because its proxies of Hezbollah and Hamas are being dismantled. Israel has shown that it has incredible capabilities to target high-value targets and kill them, and do it in a way that doesn't create massive amounts of civilian casualties. And so I think, Iran is saying, we're being made to look like fools right now. And so they're doing this attack. Whether or not they'll actually be successful has to be seen. But, in April, it was the most astonishing display of missile defense in human history when Israel, the United States, Jordan, and others intercepted that massive salvo of 300 inbound threats.
What do you think the fact that this conflict is happening now says about leadership in the United States? Certainly, the posture of the Biden-Harris administration was very different from that of the Trump administration. Do you think that that's having some kind of impact?
Look, I'm not a regionalist, but I got to say, it seems that there's a vacuum of leadership within the Middle East right now, in that, we've all heard, the comments of how back in the spring, a journalist asked President Biden, what would you say to Iran right now if they were contemplating a strike on Israel? And his response was, don't. Well, that didn't work. We've all seen the reports from inside the White House and Department of Defense of administration officials trying to tell Israel to quote, take the win after the attack on Israel in April from Iran, and not retaliate. We've seen, frankly, what was initially the first 5 months after October 7th, some relatively good statements from President Biden in support of Israel, but frankly, they've gotten really darn wobbly. And Vice President Harris and her statements almost universally are, we support Israel, but there's always a but whenever she talks about Israel in the Middle East and talking about the need for a ceasefire, as opposed to the need to get the American citizens that are still to this day being held hostage by Hamas, getting those American citizens back home. And so I think that the leaders across the board in the Middle East are saying, you've got a vice president that at least seems wobbly on these issues with Israel. And I think they're probably questioning whether or not President Biden is actually, on top of his game, as an American president traditionally has been. And they're looking at a guy who spent his weekend while, part of North Carolina and Tennessee were underwater at the beach in Delaware. And I think all parties are saying, America is not going to be showing leadership at this moment. So we're going to do what we decide to do is in our best interest. And frankly, that's a dangerous place for the Middle East to be in. And it's a really dangerous place for the United States to be in.
Now looking forward, what do we think based on the actions of today? Some people are talking about World War III. Do you think World War III is what's going to emerge from this?
I don't think World War III is going to emerge from this. I do think that we sometimes underplay the threat of World War III, but I think that's because we underplay the threat from China. But I think that it's very possible you could see an expanded conflict in the Middle East. As I said earlier, is that Iran has been working through proxies through Hamas and Hezbollah and also through the Houthis in Yemen to strike out against Israel and Israel's allies. But I think at this point, we need to be prepared for a much broader conflict between Israel and Iran. And that is going to become more likely if this attack, which is underway as we record, if large numbers of Israeli civilians are killed. And also, we had a report today at Heritage that came out that pointed out that Iran is now, according to the IAEA, stockpiling enriched uranium. And, the report notes that Secretary of State Tony Blinken said that Iran could have enough weapons usable material to test a nuclear weapon within 1 to 2 weeks. And he said that this past July. And we know that the unclassified report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on Iran's weapons program no longer contained a sentence that said we do not assess that Iran is not seeking weapons usable design information to test a nuclear weapon. That sentence was now absent, and it was in the February 2024 ODNI report. So Israel may be looking and saying, you know what, it may not be probable, but we need to be prepared for a potential Iranian nuclear breakout capability. And so I think that in Israel, at this moment, they're weighing all these things. What do we do right now in the immediacy of this attack? What do we do to respond to this attack? And what do we need to do to ensure that longer term, Iran is not able to hold hostage the people of Israel? And, I don't envy those people who are grappling with those huge issues right now. But, those are the same issues that the next president, whoever wins the election, is going to have to grapple with. What do we do about Iran? What do we do about a state that launches literally hundreds of missiles at civilian population centers? What do we do about a state that, for all indications, seem to be that this time they really are trying to build a nuclear weapon? What do we do about an Iran that gives ballistic missiles to Stone Age fascists in Yemen? These are hard questions, but this is what's going to face us.
Bob Peters, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you to Bob Peters for his contributions to this episode. You can follow Bob on X at RealBobPeters, and you can find more work by him at heritage.org. And of course, thanks as always to you for listening to Heritage Explains. You can reach out to us with thoughts, questions, or suggestions at heritageexplains@heritage.org. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Heritage Explains is written and produced by Mark Ghani, Lauren Evans, and John Pop.